Rob, what is top of mind for you today?
Well, Sabbath, our guest today is someone who is so aligned with our mission. He has his own words around this, but our mission to prepare a generation of courageous and sacrificial leaders and the importance of focusing on the humans that serve with us. I want to read something before we start, and there's a whole purpose behind this. It's this: when the veil is lifted, what people want most is wholeness and a plan for getting there. They want to feel like they're making progress, not just professionally, but personally. They want to know they matter. They want to feel seen. They want to become more of who they were meant to be. And the two things that we can't live without, love and truth. And that might sound soft to some, but it's not. It's hard. Love requires sacrifice. Truth requires courage. They are compassion and candor, grace and grit, all rolled into one. Love says, I see you. I want the best for you. I'll take a risk on your behalf. Truth says, I will be straight with you, even regarding the things that are fragmented in me. Truth and love in action become trust. And trust becomes the systemic oxygen in the air we breathe that makes everything else work. When it's gone, everything slows. When it's present, we move. And you know, Sabbath, how I've often talked about trust as the lubricant in our systems. Not just many talk about, and we talk about this as the most important currency, but it's what causes things to move well. And this is why I'm so excited for our guest today, because he's often described, I've heard him say this, as the product he spent so much of his focus on as oil in a can. And so I am really excited, Sab. So you got to introduce.
Let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Garry Ridge, former CEO and chairman of the WD-40 company, who turned a household product into a global brand and the company into one of the most admired cultures in business. But more than that, Garry is a leader who believed that building trust, coaching people, and creating tribes at work wasn't a nice to have, it was the strategy. He's the co author of Helping People Win at Work with Ken Blanchard. And his newest book, Any Dumbass Can Do It, Finding Wisdom in Life's Everyday Moments, is a raw and refreshing take on leadership that's as honest as it is inspiring. Garry now leads the Learning Moment, where he's equipping leaders to lead with heart, humility, and courage. This isn't going to be an average leadership conversation because Garry isn't an average leader. And Garry, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, wow. I now I have goosebumps. I want to meet this person that you're
Yeah.
talking about, Sab. But thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you and Rob today. And thank you for the work you do, because the more we can get the word out there that, people are so important in organizations because they're real and they're living, the better the world will be. So I'm just looking forward to a wild conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Us too. And we are going to play a quick round of wild cards. We didn't prep you for this, Garry, but what we love to do with our guests, we have a deck of 50 cards. Each one has a different question that's developmentally focused.
Uh-oh.
I pulled
Uh-oh.
10, and all you have to do is really simple. We're just going to pick a number between 1 and 10, and I'll read the question on that card, and then we'll answer simply from your gut. It could be in one sentence, or if a story comes to mind, feel welcome to tell a story. So I'll go first, and then Garry, you can go, and Rob will round us out. So 1 out of 10, and I'm going to pick number 6 today. All right, number 6 is: what has allowed you to survive well during a tough day this last week? I would say being mindful of controlling the things I could control. So, how
Hmm.
much sleep am I getting? How much water am I drinking? How much movement am I getting in the day? The things that I know will regulate me beyond what was tough emotionally or relationally or just what needed to get done, controlling what I could. All right, Garry, pick a number between 1 and 10.
8.
All right. Number 8 is, what did you experience in the last 24 hours that may have been a moment that mattered?
Oh, well, it always matters when I go and pick up my dog, Max, the wonder dog. And he makes me feel so good. I'll pick him up from Animal Keeper, and he runs out and just greets me. Doesn't matter what he's been doing all day. So, um, that was something that's really cool and that mattered to me.
I love that.
Max.
Wonderful.
Good. All
Dr.
right.
McKenna.
All right, you two. I'll go number 10.
Oh, number 10. Okay. What important thing is happening at the intersection of your life and work?
Right now we're about to transition my parents into a wonderful place, the next place for them to live. They're 94 and 96. I think in that process of realizing how important trust is in the people that will help us care for them is massive. So the the intersection is very deep in that, as you can imagine, when you're talking about your parents or your family and your spouse or your children. So that is the intersection. Sab, thank
Good.
you for getting
Thank
us
you for going there.
started. Getting us started. Gary, I am so excited for this conversation and to be with you today. So first of all, can we just open up with what is going on in the life and work of Garry Ridge today? Give us a little insight into what your life's looking like right now.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Well, as you know, I refired, not retired, 3 years ago. And I did it with some great advice from my dear friend, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. And it's the last chapter of my book, which is titled Don't Float into a Void. And he
Mm.
said,
Mhm.
being in the role you've been in for so long, you better wake up on the first day of the rest of your life with a clear purpose. And I did. I thought about it, and he said, it's time for you to pay it forward. And I rethought my purpose statement, and my purpose statement now is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happy, more connected world. And I do that through my coaching practice. I coach, I think it's about 8 CEO or C-level leaders right now, those who really understand that their behavior, leadership behavior can impact others. So I do that. Um, I speak on the subject of culture around the world, sharing my scar tissue and the things I've learned over the years to build great cultures. I'm on the board of a really fabulous company based in Cincinnati called Gorilla Glue. So if it's stuck, use WD-40. If it's not stuck, get yourself some Gorilla Glue. And then, I spend time with my wife and my family. I've got some great grandkids and spend a little time in Hawaii, travel down to Australia. My daughter's in Australia, so I do that. And I'm just grateful. I'm grateful I have the opportunity to be able to uh, really make leaders aware of the positive difference they can make.
Yeah, yeah, that it's amazing. I was just talking to a friend yesterday about retirement, and my dad got some advice when before he ever retired, and he was a friend of his who he was on a board with said, I tried to go golf
Mhm.
and I just couldn't just golf. Like it just did not work that way. And then my dad actually tried that and he's like, it just did not work that way. It's like we need a purpose, right? It's like we're driven by that. We're called to something. So thank you for that. So I would love for you to tell us the story behind your newest book and its title. So this is really intriguing to me because we are right now in conversations with my publisher about the title of my book. The manuscript's done, but the final title, it's literally in conversation for the next 2 days. And so I mentioned your book title, Any Dumbass Can Do It. And I'm curious about this, Gary. Can you go back to a seed moment that spawned your book? Is there
Well, yeah, I
a
think
moment?
that it's not only a seed moment, it's probably a garden actually, because it's more of a garden that of my life. And the reality and the reason I chose the title is I think, and I have learned and I have witnessed that some leaders believe that building great cultures in organizations is overwhelming, or some of them talk about it being the soft side of business, and it's not really results orientated, which is absolutely untrue.
Mhm.
My premise is, if you know the ingredients that you need to put in place in an organization to build a strong culture, and you are brave enough to execute on it on a consistent basis, any dumbass can build a great culture within an organization. So that's the underlying foundation of it. The other reason is the title gets attention. And let me tell you this, that an ass is a donkey. And in Australia, I could have said any dumb donkey can do it. But in Australia, my homeland, dumbass is at sometimes and regularly a greeting or of affection. Hey, you dumbass. And it's so that's the reason, is that I wanted people to understand that building great cultures is not overwhelming. You just have to know the ingredients and you have to be dedicated to executing on it.
So, so good. So tell me about, how do you know the ingredients? Like, what does that process look like for a leader, knowing the ingredients of building that culture?
Well, I think it goes back to a few things. I'm a student of Dr. Ken Blanchard, who was a dear friend of mine. He wrote the foreword for the book, and I was fortunate enough, just after becoming CEO back in 1999, I decided to go back to school. I went to the University of San Diego and I did a master's degree in leadership. And Ken was one of the professors. In fact, he and the dean of the business school actually put the curriculum together. So
Hmm.
I was able to learn the essence of servant leadership. And I was also then in a position, because I was CEO, to implement some of those, you know, foundations, if you will, and see the difference they could make. And, I think if organizations think about the ingredients, number one is, do you have a people first mindset? And we got rid of the word manager and we replaced it with coach, because our role as a people first mindset is to help people be their best they can be. Are you okay with brave accountability? Do you have a clearly defined, authentic purpose? One of the other things that I learned from Ken, which was so powerful, is not only do you have a set of values in your organization, but are they hierarchical? In other words, the number one value trumps the number two value, number three. So people can't
Mm.
cherry pick a value depending on the situation. Are you okay with transparency and trust and a simple vision in the organization? The wonderful work that you do, and that great report you put out, and the wild trust quadrant that you put together is so on target. But
Mm.
how do you do that? Um, and then do you have belonging, acceptance, and connectedness in the organization? And then, do you care about your people? Are you going to be candid with your people? Are you going to be brave enough to hold them accountable? And are you going to ensure that there is a stream of responsibility in the organization? Now, all of these things that I've shared, Bob, are pretty
Hmm.
simple, but they're not easy.
Yeah.
They're not easy, and you have to be consistent about it.
Yeah. That is really good stuff. As sort of um a segue, I want to take a little bit of a detour for just a moment, because you mentioned Ken Blanchard, and I'm curious, because it's so funny. When I was just finished my PhD, I never met Ken, never have met Ken, never got the chance to do that. But I got a manuscript from him that was a book that was getting, when he was moving more deeply into that whole servant leadership area, and I can't even remember the name of that particular book, but it came in a binder. It was literally in a ring binder, and I received it. I'm like, why am I receiving this? Like, I felt like, it was this amazing thing to see into where he was going next with his thinking. Will you tell us about the character of Ken?
Oh, yeah, Ken's 85 years old now. He lives 15 minutes from me. I've been so fortunate to call him and have him as a dear friend. Ken is the true servant leader. He believes God didn't make any junk. And he believes that, everybody who listens has the opportunity to serve. He's truly a connector. He's just a person of ultimate possibility. And on the other side, he's totally values driven.
Hmm.
So he's one of those special people in life. He's the guru of servant leadership. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of actually, after meeting him and him being my professor, I actually was on the board of his company for 10 years.
Oh, were you really?
So yeah, so I got to be in the inner track of all of that, and it was just a wonderful learning experience. So my life wouldn't be what it is today if I hadn't, back in 1999, picked up the Union Tribune, which is the local San Diego paper, and where I read about this information session about this master's degree that Ken was, really the driver behind. And I went to an information session, and Ken was speaking, and Ken said, most MBA programs get people in the head. We got to start getting people in the heart. And I thought,
Mm,
okay, I got it. And
yeah,
I went
yeah.
back to school. That's how
You,
it all started.
and you went back to school. That's amazing. I have another friend who is Dr. Dean McKay, who was very, very close, probably the closest person to Peter Drucker around the Claremont times. And I had a chance to just visit Drucker's classes when I was there. And I've been back in his books. Unbelievable, Gary. That guy, the stuff he was thinking about was so far beyond his time. And so I love asking about Ken's character because you know him. And so for people to hear that is powerful. So I noticed the other day, I saw a post that you put on LinkedIn, and it was a post about this sticky note. And it said, am I being the person I want to be right now? And you called it a little reminder. And we would describe that question as Sabbath was beginning. Like when I saw that post you made, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be fun," because that is a wild question. Like we have 50 of those kinds of questions that draw us in to this possibility of something that's important. And I'm wondering, when it comes to that question, I have a question about this. Is it seemed like that was important to you? And so any context you want to provide for that post is great. But I also want to ask you this: is how often do you ask yourself that question in a typical day?
Every day. This is my little notebook, that I make all my notes in, and I've got many of them. And you can see that this little placard is on here. And I've been carrying this around for years. I also have a sticker on my other computer over there, and it says, am I being the person I want to be right now? And then it says, who is that person?
Mm,
And I say, and I remind myself that I want to be grateful. I want to be caring. I want to be empathetic. I want to be reasonable. I want to be a listener. I want to be fact based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner. And I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow. Now, the question that everybody should ask, why does Garry Ridge, the person who once was the leader of a multi-billion-dollar company, have to have a stupid thing on his notebook to remind him of who he needs to be? And let
hmm,
me tell you why, my theory. We are just these basic human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And in the bushes, and I call the bushes in our environment, there are these thieves that come and steal who we really are from us. And they're thieves like greed and anger and all of that awful stuff. And for a moment, we feel okay. But if we don't remind ourselves of who we really think we are at our best, what we end up doing, Rob, is we take our leftovers to the next person. And
mm,
people do not deserve our leftovers. They deserve our full plate. So
yeah.
I don't know how many times, as I said, here it is. I look at it more than once a day. And before I came on with you, I looked at this and said, okay, I need to take my full self to this precious time I'm going to have with Rob today. So I need to center myself. And I don't know how many meetings, how many investor meetings, how many times I've talked to people on Wall Street where I've come out and I've gone, okay, I've got to center myself. I am not taking, after all that I have just experienced, whether it be good and sometimes bad in that last interaction, I'm not taking my leftovers to the next person. I need to take my full self.
We did research on a person's capacity to lead well under pressure. And what that research was about, it's a question I want to get into with you in just a moment. It was about what is it that allowed a person to maintain their sense of themselves and at the same time their connection to others in those high pressure situations. And so I'm really fascinated by this because, and I've heard you talk about this tension between, that truth speaking, that's being clear about what I want, what I think is important, and then also at the same time maintaining that connection to what other people think is important and needs to happen and what they value. And what we found was that the number one driver of a person's capacity to do those two things at once was what we described as sense of purpose. And so it was that sense in which they have been intentionally conscious of the reason they're in that situation in the first place. And the more specific it was, the more powerful it was. So if I'm going into a high pressure conversation with my 23-year-old son, and he and I are getting along great now, but when he was younger, we would really have these and I realized when I looked at this research, I needed to think about before I go into one of those high pressure conversations, if I want to be clear and also connected to him, I need to think about why I'm his dad in this particular season of life, as specific as possible. And so when you said that, I was just relating it to that, where you are intentionally conscious. It's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about your frequency, and it's obvious that you are intentional about that. Here's my follow-up question. Do you notice variations in the frequency of that intentional consciousness? In other words, do you notice variations in how often you actually are being good about that reminder to look at that sticky note? That might be based on the people or the types of problems. And this is a very personal question, Garry. Like, do you notice variations for you personally?
Oh,
And
yeah, of
how
course.
intentional you are?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right, and I need all the help I can get. And, I think that that awareness of who you are, just that moment to stop and think. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a great book called Triggers,
Yeah.
and what's triggering you. And in the coaching work that I do now with the leaders that I coach, I look for triggers. We have a way of them helping me identify them, but we do trigger. I mean, there are things that trigger us, and just taking that moment, stop, wait, think, center, is so important. So yeah, I do notice. I mean, I'm so imperfect. Like, I am the most imperfect being you'd ever want to meet. That's why I have to be so thoughtful about who I want to be.
Yeah. Thank you for that. One thing that's fascinating to me when I was looking at your history, you spent 35 years at WD-40, 25
Correct.
years in the CEO role. Am I getting the math
Correct. Correct.
right? And I think the average CEO tenure is about 6 years. I'm fascinated by this, like this long-standing investment and leadership in that organization. I was curious about what is it that sustained your inspiration and your engagement over that time?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. Number one was, I felt that the work we were doing was making a positive difference in the lives of others, not only to the people that worked within the company, but those who used our product. It's a great product. Number two is, it was exciting. Who else would get an opportunity to take something that's known in some places that actually does work, to places where it's not known? And for me, to think that I could sit here now and say that I have interacted with 76 different cultures around the world, to me is absolutely amazing. And the learning from that, to sit in the back streets of Shanghai and Taiwan, and walk the streets of Berlin, and understand the distribution in Mumbai. And I get goosebumps even now when I talk about it, because it was just an amazing adventure. And then having all that, to be able to see people develop through that. You know, I've watched people who started with the company as receptionists end
Uh,
up leading branches of our organization, because we were dedicated to them continually learning and developing. And to me, there's nothing better. So it was all of those things. Apart from the fact we were a public company, and I had to put up with the parts of it that really did it sometimes annoy me. The short-term thinking of Wall Street from time to time. The being a public company CEO, particularly in the later years, you really were very conscious of what you said, because people would amplify it and usually distort it. But honestly, Rob, I woke up every morning clearly understanding that I was in a position of trust and a position of responsibility where my actions were either going to positively or negatively impact those I had the privilege to lead, and I took that very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I know is core on your missional heart is this emphasis on human beings. I am a person who's drawn into, I just am fascinated by paradoxes in the experience of leaders, in the experience of humans, where there's these constant tensions that we face. And paradoxes being two seemingly contradictory things. This is the definition of a paradox, both of which are true. So
Hmm.
they're both true, but they are in a tension with one another. And sometimes we think about it, we like to resolve paradoxes. And it's one thing I've seen, Garry, in your writing, in your speaking, is this there is this awareness of the paradoxes of leadership. And one of the things when it comes to this emphasis on humans that I'm really fascinated by, and we describe this at Wild Leaders as an emphasis on the visible and the invisible. It's like when I go back and I ask CEOs, if you go back and study two things, what would they be? And the most common answer I get is either accounting, finance, and operations on one side, like one of those areas. They'll pick, like, usually it's accounting. And then the other side they'll say is psychology. Because they're like, most of my life is spent trying to understand humans, right? And then understand the business. I'm curious about what I see in culture right now is a little bit of a swing toward empathy and compassion and care and humanity. I do see that swing happening right now with less of an emphasis, and this may not be what's happening in the life of leaders, but less of an emphasis on the business realities. And I'm just curious, Garry, do we just assume that the business is important? And I'm asking this because I was with a CEO the other day who, by the way, their organization scored very, very low on our trust index. And one of the backstories of that is that they've gone through a really serious financial downturn on no failure of the business. There's a lot of economic situation happening in this, and they've had to go through layoffs, and it's affected the trust in their organization. And so I'm curious about where you place this need for the business to thrive operationally and financially alongside that emphasis on the human beings.
Well, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And here's why. And this is one of the things that really confuse me. Success in a business is the will of the people times the strategy.
Hmm.
So we can have a really, really solid strategy. We do all our work. We write the strategic plan. We understand the end user, the customer, whoever it is. We know the path to market. We've looked at the ability to build and ship and whatever the services are. Most organizations and business leaders spend a lot of time on that, and it can be the best strategy in the world. But as Gallup tells us, around 30% of people who go to work or go to give themselves to work every day are engaged. So 30 times 70 is a number. That's your outcome. But if you have a culture where 80% of your people go to work every day and are enthusiastically giving themselves against that strategy, 80 times 70 is a much bigger number. My whole theory is, and I think we proved it, is that you have to have a balance between the work on culture and the execution. And in the model that I put together, that I developed, the business model that I developed at USD, I call that the typhoon zone.
Hmm.
And the reason I call it the typhoon zone is if you get it out of balance, it will destroy your organization. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Leadership is a balance between being tough-minded and tender-hearted. It's about having a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. And there is no doubt about the fact that one of the responsibilities we have is to the people who trust us with the investment that they give us. So our position of that is we need to create an economy that is thriving so it can support the people we need to support, and it can give the people who trust us with their investment, the returns they're looking for.
The will of the people times the strategy. Powerful stuff. As a CEO, I'm curious about your thinking about measurement. As organizations grow and scale, I think folks who have not been in the role of that growth responsibility may not relate to the concept that you have to begin to measure certain things because at scale, we have to in order to understand and get our finger on the pulse. But if we over index on measurement, I was speaking to a group of CEOs a little while back, and one of them, who I wasn't sure I was getting through to, came up to me at the end of the day in the parking lot and said, "Rob, thank you for today. It never occurred to me that I could measure trust." And I'm curious, Gary, about your strategy around measurement.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
Sure. A measurement is absolutely important. In fact, before I started my journey on implementing some of the aspects of servant leadership, I did back in the year 2001. I went out and I said, I need to measure the pulse of the organization. So we did employee opinion surveys and we got the measurements. And I said, we have to know where we're starting from. But I think here's the rub. We can analytically measure, but we also have to emotionally measure. So you can have an employee engagement number that's high
Hmm.
because of what it's done, or a trust number that's high. But leaders need to get their shoes dirty and spend time in the stinky locker room to ensure that what the data says is really what is being felt and the behavior is being displayed actually in the organization. So I spent and I encouraged my leaders, instructed maybe even my leaders, get your shoes dirty. You need to spend a lot of time in the stinky locker room. And it was the same in marketing. I remember sitting in many, marketing download meetings where we'd done a lot of market research, and there were, statistics that came up that told us certain things. And there was a couple of times where I took the arms of our marketers and I took them into the field and I said, now tell me, if what we got from that research is reflected in what we see really happening in the market.
Mm.
Because if you're just going to look at the numbers and not match it with the behavior and the reality,
Mm.
you're going to make some dumb decisions. So
Yeah.
measure it, but then feel it. Is it
Yeah.
really happening?
That's so good. That's so good. And when I say you can measure trust, I don't mean like you measure trust by asking people if they trust you. It's like when you were describing earlier about the ingredients of culture, is that we know a lot. Like research tells us something about the actual drivers of trust. And if we can
Hmm.
assess those drivers that don't even use the word trust in most
Hmm.
cases. And there's a lot of the things I know that you talk about and write about are those ingredients to building those things. This emphasis on servant leadership, this balance between humility and the care of a servant leader with the need, and you've already mentioned this, for, I'm going to use my words, for truth, for boldness, for strategic decision making and clarity. And you use this is a phrase I think I've heard you here use, the tough-minded and tender-hearted. And this is such a sweet spot in our work, Gary, because I actually created an assessment called the Leading Under Pressure Inventory that assesses the two sides of that. And what we found was that most leaders have a default. It's like if you default on a loan, you just stop, you don't do anything, you just stop paying. And so we found that if people aren't in that intentional consciousness, if they aren't aware, they have a default, especially as the pressure rises, to either the tough-minded side or the tender-hearted side. And there's challenges with both. In your experience, how do you do that?
Well, first you have to determine where your natural state is. And I'm going to share with you that when I first went back to school in the year 2000 and did the disc profile, I was a turbo D. And you know what a turbo D is? Be brief, be bright, and be gone. And until I realized that was my behavior, I didn't realize how that behavior was negatively impacting maybe a turbo I who is building relationships because they're late for a meeting.
Huh.
So I had to change. I had to understand that it wasn't about me being the turbo D. I had to get in the middle because there were people on both sides of that I needed to lead. So I think the first thing is awareness. And I think I touched on this, that in my coaching program, the first thing we do is we help the leader identify what their normal leadership behavior is, and then help them understand how that behavior can either negatively or positively impact the people they have the privilege to lead.
Huh.
So I think it's all about awareness. And the tough-minded, tender-hearted thing also relies a lot on values. I remember many times when we've had to make tough decisions, because we relied on our values to guide those decisions, even though some people didn't agree with the decision, they understood why we made the decision because they were based on our predetermined values that everybody agreed were so important in the organization.
Hmm. Hmm. So it's funny. I've been asked over the years, like, how do you? I love the turbo D idea. Is how do you move a senior leader from that into that awareness? How do you start? Like, what do you say to them when you're coaching them? And this is a little harsh, but with someone who's truly like that, what I've told people, and I've used this several times, is it's two words: shut up.
Up.
And it's like, and it's funny because all the people who are the other side, they're over pivoting towards the care for others. They're like, that, why would you say that? Like, how did they think the response is like, they're going to get mad at me for saying that. But in most cases, those leaders have said, I know. Because they only, if you don't talk to them that way, they don't really even hear you yet. And so when you say shut up, then they'll say, well, how do I do that, Rob? How do I do that? And so I have my own set of advice, but I'm curious about how
Mm.
how did you how did you begin to work that muscle, that other
By
side?
practice. I'll give you an absolute true example. I had one of my senior leaders that I was working with that was a turbo I. And until I became aware of this, he used to drive me crazy. Very talented and competent person, did great work, but it's like I'd be sitting with him and I'd be thinking to myself, get to the point. Stop wasting my time. I don't need to go through this, right? So here's what I did. When I went to go see him, I took my cup of coffee and I walked into the meeting room or into his office, and the only thing intention was on my mind was, I don't have to do anything here until I drink my coffee. Until I see the bottom of this cup, I'm going to be a happy person. So I'd sit there and I'd drink my coffee, and he would do his I-ness and he would get it all out of the way. And I would get to the bottom of the cup and I'd put it down and say, oh, well, yeah, that was great. Yeah, now let's move on to something else. I used to, I used to walk around for I don't know how long with written on my bottom of my hand, on the palm of my hand, praise someone.
Uh,
Every morning I'd write praise someone. Now, by the end of the day, it was rubbed off because of sweat or whatever. But
yeah.
you have to be intentional to change anything. In my coaching work now, I have the daily questions. So let's say I've found someone who's a turbo D who's not a good listener. I ask them to ask themselves every day, did I do my best to be a better listener today? Not
Mm,
was I a better listener, because it's about intention. And they grade themselves. Did I do my best to not be a micromanager today? Did I do my best to, you know, treasure learning moments today? Whatever these things are, 5 or 6 things that we can be intentional about that will actually change our behavior because we're aware of it. That's why I have this.
yeah. Yeah. Outstanding. On the other side, the other default is what we describe as a peacekeeper, but there's all kinds of, I love your tender-hearted wording as well. And when I've worked with those kinds of leaders, because I want those people in leadership roles, but oftentimes they aren't more naturally inclined. People follow conviction. So those very tough-minded, direct speaking folks end up getting elevated often. And I want more of those people who have that more natural default to that connective tissue. But there's another challenge with them. What I often say to them is, you can't keep everyone happy without lying to someone. It's like they have to generate that willingness to tell the truth, even when it hurts. And so the two words for them that I say, this is an extreme, right? If some it's the turbo on the other side is show up.
Yeah,
Speak.
belly up, belly
And
up.
will you speak to your work with folks who default that way?
Well, I don't think you've probably heard me say this before. I don't think they lie. They fake and they hide.
Uh-huh.
That's what they do.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I would suggest that their concern is that what the leadership that they're executing is going to have them seen as not the person they want to be, which is, you know, I want to be loved by everybody. The
Yeah.
reality is you're not going to be loved by everybody. I
Hmm.
mean, it's if that's what you think is, the ultimate outcome, it's not going to happen. I've often say no good deed goes unpunished. Somebody is not going to agree with you or like what you do, even if you do it with the biggest heart you've ever given it.
Mm.
So you just have to make peace with it. And that's one of the great aspects of the work that I've done with Marshall Goldsmith. He says, did I do what I think was right? Did I do my best? If the answer is yes, yes, make peace with it and let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that, because I have heard you talk about this as well, and I'll use my own words, that a an investment in the development of others, in seeing people and identifying other leaders and just seeing your people, as you were saying, praise someone, um, that when you make that investment, that you increase their efficacy, like their belief that they could do things, because it takes a lot of ego strength to become that person, especially when you care deeply about what other people think of you and think of themselves. Um, is there a connection between your investment in seeing people and developing people and putting these human beings first that you've seen over time, that efficacy and that confidence increase in people who might needed to develop it?
Absolutely. Our dear friend Aristotle said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work, right?
Yeah.
So if we can spend our time actually, helping people gain confidence and enjoying what they're doing, they're going to do what they do at a higher level, at a better level. So I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah. Let's turn toward trust. I'm very curious about your thoughts on this, Gary. What does trust have to do with the performance of an organization and the well-being of the people within it?
Well, when you think about trust, I think about safety, right? Do I feel safe? I think it does a lot to build psychological safety. I think the work you did in the trust report work, explaining it is great work. I also think that, there are the four aspects of building trust I like too is the trust model that Blanchard did, which is am I able, believable, connected, and dependable?
Yep.
So how is that shown in an organization? And I'll talk about, my dog Max again. If you saw Max, Max is a like 80-pound black, part lab, part shepherd, part Great Dane with a really nice smile and big teeth. If you were introduced to Max and he barked at you and you didn't know him, how would you feel? You wouldn't trust you would be safe with him. But
Yeah.
actually, Max will bark at you and he won't attack you once he
Huh.
knows you. So I think people getting to know each other, and again, it's about behavior, observance, dependability, all of these things that roll into trust, speaking the truth, being able to be someone that has those aspects of believability and competency and connection and dependability, and that they do it all the time. So that builds psychological safety. And in psychological safe environments, people do better work.
I know you've had a chance to read our State of Trust at Work report and that research. I would love to hear any reflections on two or three pieces of that research that you would say resonated with you, or anything that surprised you, or something that stood out as important for people to pay attention to.
Yeah, I thought something that was really interesting is trust is high among early career employees in their 20s, dips significantly in the 30s when they get into the jungle years, and gradually rebuilds during their mid-career and beyond. And
Mm.
when I looked at that, I thought, why? And I
Hmm.
thought, well, in their 20s, they're in a new role, they're enthusiastic, it's high, I'm going to do it. And then reality hits and they go through those hard years of career. And a lot of the elements that you talk about are not in place. So
Uh-huh.
their trust goes down. And then they come out the other side and they start to think about, well, now I'm going to deal with the things that aren't there and I'm going to get reality around this and their trust. So I thought that was really interesting how that happened and reflecting on it.
Yeah, and I have the same theory also. We're going to do a deeper dive in that because it's been coming up a lot. Exactly the same thing that you said. When I saw the data, I was fascinated because a lot of times we hear this general messaging that young people don't trust organizations or their leaders. And so when I saw that data, I was like, whoa, there's something to understand there. And I think it's probably what you just said.
Hmm.
That people come in, and I don't want to say that young people have not experienced hard things. That's not my point, but that they probably are a little bit, they just don't have the experience of the brokenness of
Yes.
humanity in organizational scale. And so it's like they come in with a little bit of naivete. And it's like one of my sons said, he said, I just experienced the jungle of trust. And but he's in his early 20s. And so he's had trust issues with his roommates or in his job at the hamburger joint. But now he's seeing, oh my goodness, people do really messed up things to each other. It makes you
Yeah.
wonder. Um,
I had an opportunity a number of years ago to do an impact session with Simon Sinek and a group of people, and we were actually talking about trust. And one of the things that was a big aha to me was we are okay getting in a car with someone like an Uber driver. We were talking about Uber, getting in a car with someone that we've never met who's going to take us from A to B and trusting we're going to be safe.
uh-huh.
And I thought, ooh, wow, that's how do I think about that?
Yeah.
However, we're in an environment in work where we know someone, and because we've experienced their non-trust behaviors, because we haven't, if we would have seen that Uber driver come around the corner, do a big wheelie, burn out the tires and open the door
Right.
and say, come, get in, you're ready. We go, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. So it's this observed behavior that was so important.
Yeah. We have the weirdest trust in the strangest things. Like it's like even driving down the road, it's not even the fact that trusting that people will not cross that line. It's
Yeah,
strange, right?
yeah.
We don't know them. We have no idea. It's so interesting what you just said.
And
I,
I think that points to the what I was saying about the younger group. They haven't seen anybody do the wheelie or haven't witnessed someone crossing that line yet. So in
right.
the early stages, there's no reason for them not to trust. And
Yeah.
then they start to see the wheelies and crossing the line and the bad driving, and they go, "Whoa, I don't know that I can trust this as much."
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things we also found that you may have seen is that trust, we assume that trust is ubiquitous and that if it's somewhere, it's everywhere. And I see this over and over again when we do our wild trust index and we're doing a feedback session where we're showing them the data, which also has some narrative in it because there's an open-ended story of understanding. It's not like you said before, it's not just the numbers, but there's a heart and a story in that and a context. And I've seen this happen over and over again where a lot of CEOs do have this viewpoint on trust. And I think some of it's been the messaging in our world where trust is just broken. You either have it or you don't. And so what you'll see them doing is you'll see them almost try, even in a large organization, trying to think about who the people are who scored them lower. And
Hmm.
so it caused us to take a deeper dive into the data to look at for organizations that are in the stronghold. And we describe that as they have high trust in their teams. So people have a high trust in their team members, and they also have a high trust in their organization and their leaders. So they have the conditions around them and then the team they're working with. And so that's the 2 by 2 in the trust quadrant, that's the stronghold. What was fascinating, Gary, was that in high trust organizations, a significant percentage of people are in the jungle. So you know what I'm saying? And so I'm curious about your thoughts on related to trust and this assumption that our goal, like we should never have questions of trust. Like, how do we deal with this reality that trust is kind of being questioned every day? inside of organizations? And how do we think about that culturally and from a leadership perspective?
Well, when I think about people being in the jungle, they're lost. And the reason they're lost is there's no one leading them out of the jungle. I think that, people within organizations, if they do not have a trust in the leadership, then they're lost and they're going to end up in this jungle. Rob, the fish rots from the head. You know that, right? That's it.
Yeah.
And I guess, but I can see how that, in lower down in an organization, the leaderships, you talk about the island, high team, low organizational trust.
Yeah.
I can see how that can happen because you can have a team of people because of the behaviors of the leaders there and that there is that trust. But that doesn't mean they trust the organization, but they're
Yeah.
comfortable trusting that island. The jungle, low team, low organizational trust, is because they're all lost.
Yeah.
They're wandering around in the jungle and nobody's helping them find their way. And I'm sure you can't have a stronghold, a high team, high organization without having, that foundation underneath. So, when I read it, I went, yeah, dude, that's true. It sort of cascades.
It cascades. So at WD-40, you know how much joy it gives me just saying that related to you? Because that product is like, I use it in ways it's never intended to be used. Of course, everyone does, as better than anyone else in the world. Did you consciously think about trust specifically at WD-40?
Yeah, we did a lot of work with the trust model, the ABCD of trust. We
Okay.
talked about it. We talked about the behaviors that needed to be in place. We talked about the things that would destroy trust. And again, it came back to our principles of creating an environment where people know and feel like they belong, they know and feel like they matter, that they can make choices through having a hierarchical set of values, that they were treasured by being coached and not managed, and that we took fear away by having learning moments, not failures.
Hmm.
And those were things that, in fact, made people more able, more believable, more connected, and more dependable.
Yeah. Yeah. All of those things. I wanted to get into this thing, belonging.
Mm.
Could you share your thoughts on whether it is the organization's responsibility to ensure that people belong, or is part of that responsibility on the individuals to be open to belonging? Like I don't even ask that very well, but
I
who
know what you mean.
who
I know
bears
what you
the
mean.
responsibility for belonging?
It's not an either or, it's a both and.
Hmm.
Firstly, you have to create a cultural place where people feel like they can belong, which will give them the motivation to want to belong. So, what does belonging mean? It means a place where you're cared about. There's candor, there's accountability, there's responsibility. It's a place where, our tribal promise or tribal just cause was a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. That's why we
Hmm.
came to it's, and the whole thing about calling it the organizational employee group a tribe, nothing to do at all with, any indigenous group. We go
Yeah.
back to Ugg the caveman. Ugg the cave. We are tribal as human beings. That's how we all started. Groups of people that came together to protect and feed each other. And Ugg the caveman did that. But the thing that I loved about being able to talk about a tribal culture is the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. Because
Hmm.
if the tribal leader is not continually learning and continually teaching, then the tribe, Ugg the caveman's tribe, would go extinct. Ugg the caveman had that big old baton that he used to go out and, use to, get food or whatever it was. And if you didn't know how to use that, you would die.
Hmm.
So that's the whole basis of it. So belonging was around something that you could value, that you knew was going to protect you, a group of
Hmm.
people that come together to protect and feed each other was the whole just cause of a tribe.
So one of the things that I'm guilty of saying, and I don't know if other people have said it, but is not everyone belongs everywhere, but everyone belongs somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when we assess trust, we assess what's called aligned retention. Like retention is, too often been spoken about like you're trying to keep everybody, as opposed to you're trying to keep the people who should be there. And part of that is their choice of seeing that. And the way we often describe that is that we work with so many organizations where the mission, the culture, strategy are not clear. It's difficult to know if you belong if those
Hmm.
things are this connection. So could you speak to the connection between that clarity of mission and that choice to belong or to go find where you do?
Yeah. At WD-40, which was my experience, if you went to our careers page, the first thing that popped up at you were, these are our values at WD-40 Company.
Uh,
And we were very clear about what they were. And we basically said, if these don't feel comfortable to you, don't call us because you will not feel comfortable here.
yeah,
And so we set kind of the stage of this is what it's like to be here. And, WD-40 is a great place, but it's not for everybody. You're right.
yeah,
And so don't come, and you'll be okay.
yeah. That's good. I love that. I'm curious about your advice to a CEO if they want to build an engaged, a purpose-driven organization where trust at the personal and the team and organizational level are strong. Where would they just a starting piece of advice?
Be a dumbass.
You got it. I know you said this at the beginning, but I want you to redescribe what that means.
A dumbass is really about understanding that you are there to bring out the best of others because you can't do it all yourself. And understanding that there are the three most important words you'll ever learn is I don't know. And when I was leading the company, I used to introduce myself. G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong, and roughly right chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company, and I need all the help I can get. And if that's the position you take, you'll get a lot of help and you'll develop a lot of people and you'll have a lot of fun and you'll have an organization that not only makes a difference in the world, but makes a difference to the people it has the privilege to be that are part of it.
That is solid, solid. So before Sabbath brings us back, this has been incredible, Gary, and I have to admit, I wish I would have had the chance to work for you.
Mm.
But instead I will take the next thing and I'll be your friend.
Thank you.
We
That's more
might.
important.
So I'll take that. I'll take that at this point. Here's my question before Sabbath takes over. What is the most inappropriate way you have used WD-40?
I can't tell you.
Yeah,
Because you've
that's
already
fair. That's locked up, Rob.
that's
That's
fair.
off
Okay.
limits.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, we'll take that
All right.
answer.
Okay. All right.
Now, you could ask me what's the most inappropriate way I've heard other people have used WD-40.
Oh, we'll take that answer too.
It's not necessarily inappropriate. On the WD-40 website, there are 2,000 uses of WD-40 listed. But one of them that I find really cute was there was an old lady lived in the Midwest of US and she had a bird feeder, a pole, right, that had a bird feeder bowl on the top of it. And squirrels used to run up the pole and steal the bird feed, right? And the lady didn't know what to do. So what she did, she used to spray the steel pole with WD-40. Can you imagine those squirrels trying to get up
Yeah,
that pole?
That's
So
awesome. Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing.
that's so good. Oh, Gary, thank you so much for such a rich conversation. What a gift. And before we wrap up, a couple things we wanted the people listening or watching to know how can they stay connected to the work that you're doing? What is the best way for them to connect with where you're at now and the work that you guys are doing?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Probably the best place is LinkedIn. You'll find me there, and I post on there regularly. But I do have a chore for people if they're game. If they go to
Okay.
my website www.thelearningmoment.net, at the top of the page there's a thing called the Dumbass Quiz. If they take the Dumbass Quiz, they will get a measurement of their level of dumbassery. The higher the score, the better. And I will then also send them a little playbook on 3 things they can start doing tomorrow to change the culture in their organization. So a dumbass quiz, high score from the dean of dumbassery is a good thing.
Okay. I love that.
Amazing.
Awesome. And one last wild question. Gary, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Oh, I have to change all the time. Life's a gift. Don't send it back unwrapped.
So
Thank
good.
you so much for this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you do and for helping us try to make the world just a little bit better because it needs it.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.